Hello, and welcome to the Full of Ship podcast. Real answers to real problems. With your host, Kyle Henderson, CEO and co-founder of Vizion, a podcast dedicated to demystify the chaotic, often turbulent world of ocean freight. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to another episode of Full of Ship. I'm your host, Kyle Henderson, and today our guest is Lucas Schorer, CEO of Kestrel Insights. Welcome, Lucas. Welcome to Full of Ship. Very excited to talk to another entrepreneur. I hear that your company is focused on providing the most accessible quality data for monitoring shipping events and just improving visibility overall. Maybe you can get us started with a little bit of your background and a little bit of the background of Kestrel Insights.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me. It's a rainy, dark afternoon up here in Northwest Montana. So to be able to sit here and chat is much more enjoyable than walking my dog out in the rain. So my name's Lucas, founder of Kestrel Insights. My background is kind of interesting. I'm worked in a variety of industries, and I'm actually a mechanical engineer by trade. And in the true stereotypical nature of an engineer, I've always been very, very methodical in my mindset as it comes to everything I do. And so, when I first started in the supply chain and in transportation logistics, I'm not a lifer. I don't have these 30 years at a brokerage, know how the wheels turn, know how the trucks run and all that stuff. But myself and my co-founders, you've always had a background in data. And one of the things we saw as technology really started to become widespread adopted through this space was how data could power a lot of these incredible tools that people have built in the space. People have built these incredible things, and then they're really starting to see how better and better data sets can bolster these products and just continue to pull value out of all corners of them. So that's kind of where we started. We saw kind of that lack in quality data sets and saw how we could bring value to big existing players from our little niche over there. So we primarily focus on geofences, and we can kind of get into the nuances of a geofence, what they are, where we focus on them in the world. But that's mainly what we do at Kestrel Insights and what our data sets really consist of.
And with your geofences, your data sets, your focus on quality data to both empower and enhance and extend software. Who are the
Yeah.
customers of Kestrel? Like, what type of companies do you work with?
It's a good question because and geofences are interesting because they're basically useless if they're alone. If they're standing on their own, you can't do anything with them. And so what we've seen in this industry is you're always comparing them against the location of some asset, whether it's a truck, a ship, a container. That's when geofences really start to show their true value. And they're very simple. It's 3 timestamps that people are using with geofences: arrival time, departure time, and detention, or time spent on site at a facility. And what we mainly focus on are shipper facilities, distribution centers, ports, whether it's the terminal or the whole port, highways, different zones, anything along the supply chain that a customer wants insight to there. And so our customers are, we're not out there knocking on the door of every single carrier, every broker, and bringing them our geofences. What we really mainly partner with are technology platforms and logistic tools in the space that are kind of SaaS based, because we see if we can get our geofences and our data sets to empower their tools, they have such a broader reach to the end users who are really on the road in this space, making the supply chain turn. So our typical customers are those logistics tools, those software platforms who are building tools that leverage geofences, and we can just bring them a higher quality data set to build those same tools on. So that's mainly where we play around the space and who we typically work with.
So it's really exciting to hear that we're both working on similar problems around data, insights, visibility, making that data more accessible. Now, it's the monotonous routine, that manual process that continue to kind of slow down decision making and lead to costly errors. On the container side, we've seen container tracking help automate information sourcing. Similarly, at Kestrel, you've seen a lot of value in automated polygon geofencing. But first, let's level set with automation. What do you think the buyers in the market are focused on around automation, and what are they looking to solve through data that can help automate? You mentioned, those three key timestamps. Enter the fence, exit the fence. How long do you linger in the fence?
Yeah.
But what do those fences truly represent for their business at the end of the day?
Yeah, and your question around automation, I think it kind of covers the main value proposition of it. And I think as teams are always trying to optimize, the supply chain really gets a bad rap of being so inefficient and broken and all these things. I hate the word broken. It's like everyone's still getting stuff. People are still getting second day delivery on Amazon. People are still getting things. So it's not broken. But I think one of the biggest things is that optimization and always looking to improve and always looking to just be more efficient. Anything you do, it's any industry. But in supply chain, the automation has really, I think, taken such a big step with just the widespread adoption of technology in general. And so when it comes to geofences, the automation really comes from, no one's picking up the phone and trying to check in with the driver anymore and say, hey, did you arrive? Or how long were you there for? Or things like that. Geofences can really, really help automate that. Or as you try and make a driver's day much more efficient, and let's say you want to pop up check-in information for them the second they arrive at the gate, you need a really, really precise geofence to make sure that automation and those steps in a driver's day happen at the right times. Because if they happen a mile out, the driver's gonna be like, "What is this? I don't need my check-in information yet. I'm still looking at my directions." They're gonna swipe it away or cancel it. And then when they truly do arrive at the gate, now they don't have the paperwork, for example, that they needed at that moment. So I think that's how automation is really helping, or is really making the waves in this space. Now, when you look at automation in terms of the actual creation of our geofences and where we've taken it to, is there's two methods basically for geofencing in right now in the space. Number one is you can use circular geofences. They're arbitrary circles around a center point of usually that final destination. But the problem is they're really inaccurate. There's no property on Earth that's a perfect circle unless you're geofencing a pivot in the middle of a hayfield. So there's obviously going to be wasted space. So polygons are widely accepted as more accurate, but how do you get that polygon? And the current methods now on pretty much any telematics platform, whether it's the end user, logging into a dashboard and doing this, or even, on the back end with data teams trying to leverage geofences, someone's got to draw them. So someone is on a map, searching addresses, clicking around and creating those polygons. And so what we've been able to do through different data partners and kind of building a QA QC process to pair up with it is we've been able to automate that creation. So we're not sitting in Kestrel Insights drawing geofences. Thank God, that'd be terrible. And so where we've tried to focus on automation is give time back to those teams who are spending time drawing geofences to go do something else. Go do other revenue generating activities for your teams. Go solve other great problems around the space, because every team that we partner with, none of them look at us and say, no, geofencing and the creation of geofencing is a core competency for us. I want 10 team members in a dark room drawing these. They're like, we've got bigger things to go do, bigger problems to solve. We're better at other things. So let's automate the process of geofencing so we can put time back in the days of our teams to solve meaningful problems. It's a long-winded answer on automation, but as you can tell, I love it.
You had mentioned that polygons are more accurate because they better represent the triggering details of where means what. How, and I'm curious about this because also being a data company here at Vision, we we tout and we share the story that data quality is everything. I'm curious, as you've built your product and you've built your company, what's the story been around building trust with the customer that the geofence is accurate? How how have you guys evolved from, like, the first polygons you put together to and rolling them out to some customers and then being like, hey, these are great, and then they come back like, oh, but I need this tweaked or something didn't go right. Like, how do you build trust in data when data works really well with automation? It's not seen or heard from, it just flows and it just works until occasionally something breaks. But just curious, that trust story always ends up being a kind of a cornerstone of the customer relationship. So I'm curious how you guys have built it up over time.
Yeah, and especially in data. Data is a word, it just the word in general invokes kind of like closed doors already, and people are like, oh, data, data, it's already a word that, that trust is so important. And I think it's an interesting question. One of the biggest things that we saw too with geofencing was, and especially when it plays on trust, is there's no standard. And so you take a Walmart distribution center, for example, and say there's 100 different carriers going there. Half of them could be using a circle. Another 30 could be drawing their own polygons. Another percentage is doing a mixture of the two or something. And so there's just no common ground to build from, whether it's looking into problems around detention or arrival times, or how to again optimize that driver shows up, gets unloaded, and leaves. To really start making these inroads, you need a data standard. And so that's one of the biggest things that I think helps build trust, is saying, hey, we're gonna work together to get to this standard, and this is why it's going to benefit everyone involved. So I think being open about the mission and how we're going to get there, I think, is number one. Number two is, we understand that there will be changes that need to be made to locations, whether property shifted, addresses were typed in differently. And so one of the biggest things that we built was allowing that feedback loop to occur, where we have the processes in place to make changes as needed. And so what I mean by that is, addresses are notoriously horrible to work with. And there's a lot of great companies, I think, trying to establish a kind of a standard away from addresses, which I think is great. And that's a whole nother thing that'll benefit tons of people. But since we're stuck working with addresses, that's one of the biggest things is, hey, let's help you get better addresses into your system. Let's show you on our end, when we geocode these and build you geofences, where some of these errors are occurring. So I think that open dialogue is huge, as well as what we're doing to correct things or make changes when requested. Because, like I said, gates move or property lines change. It's not that it was wrong, but we want to show that we have a process in place to make sure it's always current with what these teams need. Um, so I think that's huge. I think that's huge for that trust side of things.
How do Kestrel customers consume your geofences? Is this they're getting a package data dump of geofences, they're connecting to you via an API? What's the mechanism for delivering fences and updating fences?
Yeah, so we both of those. So you can either just get a flat file from us, CSV with all the polygons you need, or you can tie into our API and ingest them that way. It's surprising. I was caught off guard with how many people were like, API is great for this application, but if I just want quick dump like this, or I've got this other specific application for some little research project we're doing, we've had a lot of flat files, and so I love seeing the both of them. The API, I think, it's just very situational. I think automation technology is not this blanket answer to every single problem that people have, and so I think the API works great for some people, and it's people who have the systems and the operations or the use case to really, really take advantage of it, see incredible efficiency out of it. And so we love making that available to customers. And there's other customers who maybe don't have the team or the setup to be able to tie into that or kind of manage it. But we don't want to cancel out our data for those people. We want to make sure it's still available so people can take it that way as well. And how we take in requests are addresses, GPS points, or kind of area descriptions. So, for example, I had someone reach out to me the other day looking for Pacific Northwest and then states and counties within that. So that's obviously not an address or something like that, but a description of what that is, we can absolutely do. But teams who are doing, thousands and thousands of geofences, they're just cranking out addresses, and we have a system that just automatically pushes those through and creates the polygons. So um, it's very, very minimal on the manual side of things, and they can ingest it either through the API or through a flat file.
I'm curious if Kestrel's experience has been similar to Vision's. When we are working with a customer or partner, our product offering, similar to what you said with geofences, by itself, it it delivers X amount of value. But
Mhm.
what it really delivers value is when it's partnered up with other other data or other workflows or other pieces of software. I'm curious, how have you seen the kind of landscape or ecosystem change or develop from the kind of customer's perspective, where it's like, maybe at one point in the past, like, no, everything's in house, or, we're buying this one monolithic software platform to do everything in,
Hmm.
versus no, let's have specialists, companies, products, services get stitched together and be a little more nimble and agile. Ha- have you seen? No, we've seen it from our side, but I'm curious from your perspective,
Hmm.
because I think we're kind of comparable in this way. How much of the tech in the industry you think today is kind of monolith versus ecosystem of services, APIs, products, and which way is the trend going?
Well, if you say we're similar in this way, I think that's a huge compliment, 'cause you guys have obviously been incredibly successful, what you do. So to do that, I thank you. But I think it's two part. I think that ecosystem has benefited large players to really fill niches and holes that they maybe haven't been able to focus on quite as much. And I also think it's helped players who smaller players maybe do have more of a niche band together and really compete and bring value at a larger scale. And what I mean by that is, number one, those larger players. Definitely this whole idea of like a platform, I think, is really, really gaining momentum. And teams are much more open when they look at buy versus build, or build, not so much buy, but partner, collaborate. That whole idea, I think, is occurring a lot more, because with APIs and with just how easy it is to share data nowadays, um, it just makes more sense. People can do it more efficiently. They can usually get a higher quality because, like I mentioned earlier, I've never come into contact with a platform that's like, no, building geofences is a core competency of ours, and we're going to keep this in house. Usually, they're like, thank thank God, this is great. Let's get this. Hand this over to a team that this is all they do, all they focus on. So I think that's huge. Um, and then on the other side of, these niches being able to band together and almost offer their own platform because they have partners, I think is really amazing. And we've had a really interesting use case with this recently, where this company who they focus on human trafficking, sex trafficking, and labor trafficking in the supply chain. But they have built this incredible system to dive into kind of the deep web and find where these locations are and monitor for trafficking and share the data in that sense. They came to us and said, "We have this incredible list of locations, but a lot of our partners, they don't have a way to track against them. Can you geofence these, Lucas?" And we're like, "Absolutely." I mean, that's a perfect example of, they've got an incredible data set. We've got an incredible process to create even another layer of data on top of that, being the geofences. And now we can be even more impactful with getting this data out into the supply chain to fight, a major problem and a horrific problem. And so that's two players that aren't this major platform, but that have banded together to kind of, accept each other's, what they're really really good at, to bring value to the industry. So I think it's on both of those sides is really impactful.
What's next for Kestrel?
What's next for Kestrel? It's a great question. I think one of the, you talked about trust early on, and one of the biggest things for us was, don't get too far over our skis with trying to do all these different nuances, build on top of geofence, do all these different things. We need to really establish a quality foundational data set and trust with our customers of, hey, these geofences are solid and Kestrel is good at doing this, and they've really proven it. And so that way, when we go into other products, we can hopefully carry that brand identity with us. So there's a lot we can build on top of a geofence, other metadata layers. That trafficking one is just an example, but other things we can do that I think build on top of a geofencing can bring added value to those customers that have tied into us already. So we're definitely looking at ways, or in that, where we can bring value. Um, and then I think just continuing to improve on just the data lifecycle that we've built. Being continually being able to process more and more addresses, more and more polygons, and do that faster and faster, and more accurate for our customers, will be huge for us. So I think those are things we're focused on, at least in the near term. Um, and yeah, we'll see where it takes us.
Where does technical support or engineering support fall into that value story, that trust story? It sounds like you've developed an amazing product. You're continuing to enhance it and improve it, but do your customers just want to be on the receiving end of that and never hear or talk to you? Or I doubt that's the case, but where does support fall into the overall solution quality and value for Kestrel and your customers?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, as a data company, and you guys might see this a lot too, sometimes no news is good news. A lot of times companies will go months and months without hearing from them. They just continue to send you their requests, and sometimes that's great. What I think is really interesting, and we started to see this with some of our customers, is when they start to get curious about different applications, they start reaching out around, hey, could you guys do something like this? Or what are your thoughts on how a geofence could play into this role? So I think the support, there's obviously the engineering support on just tying in, accepting data, submitting requests, all that stuff to make sure that, onboarding is really, really smooth. But then there's the support in terms of how we can show how our technology and our database can play into and support some of these other problems or ideas that some of our customers have. And that's what I think's been some of the coolest stuff we've seen. Use that trafficking example, that I would have never had any expectations that our data set could potentially be used to fight sex trafficking, here in the United States, which is just incredible. So I love seeing how creative some of our customers can get because again, they're living in their world, they're professionals in what they're doing, and they're starting to see how Kestrel can improve and help some of these other things that they're looking at. So I think the support is kind of twofold. Obviously, the very technical side of things, and then on the ideation side of things, and showing how continuing to build that trust that we can be a solution provider for them, more than just here's an address for a Walmart distribution center, give me that polygon and I'm off and running. But let's tackle some other things together, and hopefully we are looked at as the partner that can do that with them. So I definitely believe in that.
I had this thought earlier in the conversation, and I forgot to bring it up and ask. It sounds like most of the Kestrel geofences today are, let's put in air quotes, outdoor geofences. How much demand have you seen for wanting to do indoor geofences or manage that type of data set? Like, not just when trucks are arriving outside the
Mhm.
warehouse, but when things are moving around inside the warehouse.
That's
I'm not sure if that's something Kestrel focuses on or not, but just generally in the industry, what are you hearing since you guys are all things location? So I'm sure the topic on occasion comes up.
Yeah, are you talking maybe like a warehouse management system, something like that, like indoors moving pallets, or is that kind of your thought on it?
It could be that. It could be, not necessarily like bin oriented, but
Mhm.
years ago, I had the good fortune of working for a company named Navtech, which then got acquired by Nokia. And I worked on a special project, which was interior navigation. Example, how
Hmm.
does someone, and this was like before the iPhone came out. So, like, how does
Yeah.
someone use their flip phone to get walking instructions from one store in a mall to another store in a mall type of
Mm.
scenario? I'm just curious, have you heard anything about interior location technology needs from your customer base?
So from our customer base, not a whole lot, just because I think just what our customers are focused on. That's not once things go inside, let's say, that's not really where their expertise is. But I've absolutely seen tons of applications for geofencing in that sense. And a lot of it, this is outside of supply chain, but a lot of marketing, especially in those denser areas, whether it's a mall. I know there's not too many
Air
malls
tag,
anymore, but yeah,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. Um,
beacons.
yep,
Yeah,
exactly. So I've definitely seen applications like that. The what I've seen in those areas though is two things. Number one, the the intricacy and the accuracy of a polygon isn't always as needed. So, for example, if you got a store and you're going to draw a 50-foot diameter circle around it, that use case is typically okay with that application of a geofence. An exact polygon around Gap or Old Navy or something is not necessarily always needed, especially in a marketing sense or in an indoor sense like that. Um, so I've seen that case. And then number two, for us, one of the biggest things that we saw with geofences was that need for a data standard. So where if you're going to the Walmart distribution center in Kansas City, this is the geofence for it. Whereas trying to make those inroads with, this store in this area, there's a little bit more room for kind of customization, which absolutely an opportunity there to capitalize on that, but not kind of what we were focused on. Um, I think it's a great question because I think as automation takes over so many manual tasks, it will absolutely be needed. And I think as the precision of location data, so that blue dot when you look on your Find My Friends and see where you're at, I think as that really, really becomes better and better and better, those interior geofences can be extremely valuable. Where in large take a large distribution center, for example, trying to get from one desk to the other. You look up an employee directory and you're like, where does John sit? And you hit go and it can actually see, you've turned this corner around that cubicle, you've gone down this hall. I think some improvements on actual location technology and where that blue dot falls will be needed for that to be really valuable. But I could see it. I could see it getting really weird and big brothery too. Like, oh, you were at your desk for X amount of time. What the heck? But obviously that's just I'm just kidding about that. But I think it could be really valuable once that location improves.
You mentioned standards earlier in the conversation as well. What's
Mhm.
the state of affairs for geofence standards in the industry today?
It's oh man, it's there is basically none. I mean, there are no standards. And I was just in Long Beach with at the IANA Expo, the Intermodal Association of North America, and at one of their committee meetings, they have a geofence task force that is trying to figure this out for their members and looking at solutions. So I think there's a lot of people trying to figure out, okay, what is the best way to go about this, because it's very clear that there is no standard. Um, and I think one of the biggest problems with that is not having a you need to have a data set that really is open to cross-platform implementation in every sense of the word. There's no competitive advantage here or there, truly allowing all users of a geofence to access it. Because the second you cut out one group, if that group needs geofences and they're going to create their own, and you now have inherently disrupted that need for a standard. So I think that'll be a big play for geofences and helping out with that standard adoption. But in terms of the current state of affairs, I don't think it's abysmal, but I think there's room for improvement, and I think the industry's open to it. And some of the biggest things pushbacks we often get are, or not pushbacks we get, but pushbacks we've seen are people like, well, I don't want better tracking of this or that because you're just going to use it to blame me for things or charge me for things. And I think as people start to see how that accuracy and that standard benefits everyone involved that's having any kind of conversation around those three timestamps is really valuable. And so once people have all started to see that, I think the adoption is really starting to move forward. So um, yeah, I think I got hopes. I got high hopes. And hopefully I've got a team and a product that can help push that forward. But yeah, there's some ground to make up, but we'll get there.
Are there any organizations or companies you think are kind of well positioned to have a strong, educated perspective on what the standard should be? My mind goes to, they're not independent anymore, but you think about like OpenStreetMaps, or
Mhm.
a lot of work has been done by the Google Geo team, for example, on these
Mhm.
topics. Who are you seeing maybe having an opinion worth of listening to when it comes to standards in this space, and maybe even
Yeah.
the cloud to push a standard?
Yeah. Um, your comment about the opinions of that standard, I think one of the biggest things will be the the teams on site at these locations. So whether it's like at a distribution center, at a port, at a at a railroad terminal, giving them a way to provide feedback of, hey, we live and breathe on site. Yes, this is the apparent boundary for this facility, but you may not know that this dirt lot offsite is actually is a staging area for us, and giving teams that live and breathe at these locations the ability to be a part of that standard setting, I think will be really important, and an important group to definitely listen to, and giving them the tools to provide that feedback. So I think that that'll be really, really interesting to see. And we get a lot of questions too, like, have you thought about other verticals to apply your geofencing database to outside of trucking and transportation? And we have, but I think to set the standard in this space, it's got to be people in this space and people who are in transportation logistics and understand the nuances of all these locations and what's going on. So I think that's one of the biggest things is the people that really move this forward are gonna be people in this space, because no one can come in and just pick it up, in a couple of days. I mean, I'm a great example of that. I would never claim that I could step into a broker's shoes and start moving freight, because I'm not from this industry, and I'm a data guy. I'm a science guy in that sense. And that's why we wanted to give the data to the people who can really keep the tires moving. So I think it's going to come from within the space to change the space.
I wonder if we'll see a company emerge in this space because, from my experience, having worked closely with the Google Geo team in the past,
Mhm.
people don't necessarily know this, but behind the scenes at Google Maps, there are teams of hundreds of people who are just going through and fixing errors and issues in the map. And that
Yeah.
can be something as simple as, like, the wrong label on the street, the wrong kind of location for a business or a company. I mean, Google's mindset here is, we got to organize everything that has a geo quality to it. Which, if it's a physical thing, it has a geo quality to it in the world in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form, and that's a lot of things to organize. I mention this because this need for some expertise in the industry. I'm curious if you think something similar will have to exist, a company in the supply chain or logistics industry who just wholly focuses on what is the map of the world that is logistics oriented, and the constant maintenance of it and expansion and depth and deepening of its kind of resolution or detail of the data. Do you think that's a necessity, or is it going to organically be kind of pieced together with lots of different players?
Yeah, that's a really
Or is
interesting
that what you guys are
question.
doing?
Gosh, if I could claim to be doing that, I would love it. I wouldn't be sitting here in my home office. You'd see me I'd own the top 50 floors of the Empire State Building or something. It's an interesting question, and I I think it'll be kind of that platform approach, because even like Google, I think they're obviously a massive, massive company, but they've made major steps in getting to that point along, mergers and acquisitions. And I think whether it's Google now instead of 100 companies that were, they all got there from so many great teams and so many great ideas that were able to build up and fill these niches. So I don't know. I think there's incredible teams that have nailed so many cool things. Like obviously, Trimble. They've got they have such an extensive their maps department in terms of navigation and their Copilot stuff. So that's an incredible part of it. And then other teams that are building out maybe facility profiles for locations. That could be a whole other part of it. So I think Google got to where they are was obviously over a long, long period of time. So could someone grow and eventually just gobble it all up and be the major player? Maybe, but I see it more as a collaboration between a lot of parties who have really nailed some aspect of it. Because, like you said, even Google, they've got hundreds and hundreds of GIS experts just fixing maps. So maps and geography and just geospatial stuff is so difficult unless someone goes around and just walks everything. So I think it requires expertise in very specific areas to kind of bring together all those parts to, like you said, nail the entire supply chain, or just the map of the supply chain and what every turn and every step. Um, so I think it'll be more of that approach than, uh, yeah, conglomerate being able just to do it all. But who knows? Yeah, this is recorded and in here for eternity. So everyone can call me wrong in 10 or 15 years if they want.
So my last question or prompt, what's the future of geo in supply chain from your perspective?
The future of geo. What do you mean by that? Help me elaborate on that a little bit for me. Not too much. 'Cause I no, what do you kind of mean?
Geotechnology, geodata, the digitization, the deepening
Yeah.
of automation around location in
Yeah.
supply chain. What do you think it's going to? How much is it going to mature? What's it going to unlock over the next few years from your perspective?
I think accuracy and precision will be the next improvements of it all. Visibility, I think, really just exploded. It was top of everything. Track everything, put IoTs on everything, and then now it's like, okay, we know where everything is, but to what degree of accuracy and to what degree of precision can we start to to do things with that? And we had a really interesting use case where a colleague of mine I know, when he was a broker, he lost $150,000 load of dog food because at 10 feet. That truck pulled up and it was 10 feet outside of the locked gate that it needed to be inside. And so I think that level of precision is really starting to matter. So instead of knowing that it was outside, raising an alarm and be like, no, 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 you can't leave yet. Can't drop this truck yet. You got to get inside. The blue dot was close enough. And so as automation starts to take over, instead of someone walking out there and verifying it, saying, oh yeah, they appear there, they're close enough, good to go. That starts to, as tech starts to take over a lot of these manual tasks, that precision is really going to be needed to kind of push through, I think, the next step. So I think the precision and accuracy will be big, to just continue to build automation on top of that, because those three timestamps I talk about, arrival, departure, and time spent on site, they're really, really simple, but when curated accurately can be very, very powerful. Like, let's say right when that truck gets there, the minute that timestamp starts, that truck on that site is typically there for 37 to 41 minutes. So let's queue up their next load at 47 and a half or something. I think we can get down to that level of accuracy. But if the geofence is so big where it's like, oh, it's kind of got plus or minus 10 minutes or 15 minutes of arrival, you now can't begin to optimize to that level of accuracy where we're talking seconds. So I think that'll be the next phase of geo
Yeah.
is the accuracy and precision.
I think you're right. There's a lot of scenarios where the 1 + 1 will equal 3, because even in your story of the truck outside the gate and inside the gate, and we hear this a lot with companies we speak to as partners and customers. IoT devices have been such a hot topic in the past few years, but the value of what an IoT device can deliver, and in this sense, a- the blue dot is effectively generated by IoT devices, one way or the
Hmm.
other. Whether you want to say like GPS on a cell phone is an IoT device, or if it's a more specific sensor in some way, shape, or form,
Hmm.
but that location information often becomes more valuable when there's contextual information. So, like a delivery confirmation or notice that comes from the internal system at the warehouse that was expecting the dog food type of situation. Like,
Hmm.
and how can you make sure those two data points show up in the same space and can be joined in some way, shape, or
Hmm.
form? It becomes a 1 + 1 = 3 type of scenario when you can connect all of these different data sets.
And
And getting to your point, you were describing that as automation before.
yeah, no, I
Well,
definitely agree.
Lucas, thank you for your time today. It was a pleasure chatting with you. This has been another episode of Full of Ship. I'm your host, Kyle Henderson. Our guest today was Lucas Schorer, CEO of Kestrel Insights, knowledgeable about all things geofences in the supply chain logistics industry. You can feel free to find Lucas and his company. What's the URL if people want to check you guys out?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find us at KestrelInsights.com. You can find us on LinkedIn, and yeah, feel free to reach out, and we'll certainly get back to you. But no, I appreciate you having me, Kyle.
My pleasure, and I thank you on my behalf, my company's behalf, and of course on behalf of the audience. It was great hearing about these hot topics of geofences and the value they deliver. So, thank you again for your time. This has been another episode of Full of Ship. Till next time, I'm your host, Kyle Henderson. Cheers.
Thank you for joining Kyle and his guest on the Full of Ship podcast. Be sure to subscribe and tune in next time as Kyle continues to demystify ocean carrier tracking with his future guests.